The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Wilson, Nebraska Territory, as Wilhelmina Zeller clutched her baby to her chest and ran for her life. The year was 1867, and what had begun as a journey west with promises of a new beginning had turned into a nightmare when her husband Samuel was shot dead by bandits who had attacked their wagon train 3 days prior. Now, alone and desperate, she fled through the darkness, the sound of hoofbeats growing louder behind her. "Hush, Eliza," she whispered to her 6-month-old daughter, whose whimpers threatened to reveal their location. Wilhelmina's auburn hair had fallen loose from its pins, and her once fine blue dress was now torn and covered in trail dust. Her throat was parched, her feet blistered, but still she pushed forward, knowing that to stop meant certain death or worse. The bandits who had murdered Samuel and scattered the other travelers had taken particular interest in the young widow. Their leader, a man with a scar running from temple to chin, had made his intentions clear. "A pretty thing like you shouldn't be alone out here," he had sneered, reaching for her before she managed to slip away in the chaos, grabbing her baby and the small bag of provisions she could carry. For 3 days, she had moved mostly at night, hiding during daylight hours, making her way toward Wilson, the nearest settlement according to her husband's maps. But now, her luck had run out. The bandits had picked up her trail, and she could hear their horses approaching from the east. In desperation, Wilhelmina spotted an abandoned wagon just beyond the outskirts of town, its canvas cover torn and flapping in the evening breeze. With the last of her strength, she ran toward it, ducking underneath and placing her precious Eliza on the ground beneath the wooden bed. "Stay quiet, my love," she murmured, though the infant, sensing her mother's fear, began to cry harder. Wilhelmina tried to shush her, but it was too late. The sound of horses slowed to a walk and boots hit the ground nearby. "Come on out, Mrs. Zeller," called the scarred man's voice, eerily calm in the gathering darkness. "We just want to talk. Ain't no need to make this difficult." Wilhelmina held her breath, pressing herself against the dirt, one hand clamped over her own mouth to stop from sobbing, the other gently rocking Eliza, who continued to wail. The footsteps drew closer, and she could see dusty boots through a gap in the wagon bed. "I hear that baby of yours," the man chuckled. "You can't hide from us." A hand reached under the wagon, grasping for her, and Wilhelmina kicked at it desperately. The man cursed, and she heard the unmistakable sound of a gun being cocked. "That wasn't very friendly," he growled. "Now I'm losing my patience." Just then, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats filled the air. 3 shots rang out in rapid succession, followed by shouts and the sounds of men scrambling. More gunfire followed, and Wilhelmina curled her body around Eliza, trying to shield her from whatever new danger approached. After what seemed like an eternity but was likely only minutes, silence fell. Eliza continued to cry, her wails echoing in the stillness. "Hello," called a deep, unfamiliar voice. "Is someone under there?" Wilhelmina remained frozen, unsure if this new arrival was friend or foe. A man knelt down, his face appearing in the gap beneath the wagon. In the fading light, she could make out strong features, a square jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes that seemed kind even in the shadows. "Madam," he said softly, "I think those men have gone for now, but they might come back with reinforcements. You and your little one can't stay here." Eliza's cries grew louder, and the man's expression softened further. Her baby was crying under the wagon, he called to someone Wilhelmina couldn't see. Then, extending a hand toward her, he spoke directly to her again. "My name's Vincent Drake. I'm the sheriff in Wilson. You're both safe now." Wilhelmina hesitated, still wary after all she had endured. But when Eliza's cries turned to hiccuping sobs, maternal instinct overrode fear. She took the offered hand and allowed herself to be helped from beneath the wagon, cradling her daughter close. Standing in the twilight, she got her first proper look at Vincent Drake. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in simple clothes with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. A cowboy hat sat atop dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was weathered from the sun but not unkind, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled often. "Thank you," Wilhelmina managed, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Those men, they killed my husband. They've been following me for days." Vincent nodded grimly. "The Blackwell gang. They've been terrorizing travelers along the trail for months now. I'm sorry about your husband, madam." "Wilhelmina," she offered. "Wilhelmina Zeller, and this is Eliza." "Mrs. Zeller," he acknowledged with a slight tip of his hat. "We need to get you both to town. It's not far, and we can find you a safe place for the night." As if on cue, a second rider approached, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20. "Sheriff," the young man called. "I tracked one of them about a quarter-mile before I lost the trail in the creek. Looks like they're headed east, but they could circle back." "Thank you, Danny," Vincent replied. "This is Mrs. Zeller and her daughter. They've had a rough few days." He turned back to Wilhelmina. "Can you ride?" She nodded, though in truth she wasn't certain she had the strength to stay mounted. "I can try." Vincent seemed to read her exhaustion. "You'll ride with me. Danny can take your things." He gestured to her small bag, which she had kept clutched in one hand even as she held Eliza. Before she could protest, Vincent had lifted her effortlessly onto his horse, then mounted behind her. One strong arm encircled her waist, steadying her and the baby, while his other hand took the reins. "Hold on," he instructed, and then they were moving, the gentle rhythm of the horse's gait nearly lulling Wilhelmina to sleep despite her circumstances. As they rode, Vincent explained that he had been out patrolling after reports of the gang's activity nearby. "Lucky I heard the shots," he said, "though I'm sorry I didn't arrive sooner." "You arrived exactly when we needed you most," Wilhelmina murmured, allowing herself to lean slightly against his solid chest as exhaustion overtook her. The lights of Wilson came into view, a small collection of buildings nestled in the valley. It wasn't much of a town, yet a general store, a saloon, a small church, and scattered houses, but to Wilhelmina, it looked like salvation. Vincent took her directly to a modest two-story building with a sign identifying it as Wilson Boarding House. An older woman with silver-streaked hair opened the door at his knock, her expression shifting from irritation to concern when she saw Wilhelmina and the baby. "Martha," Vincent said, "this is Mrs. Zeller and her daughter. They need a room and some looking after." Martha's weathered face softened. "Of course. Come in, dear. You look dead on your feet." Wilhelmina found herself ushered inside to a warm kitchen, where Martha immediately set about preparing tea and heating water for a bath. Vincent explained the situation in low tones while the older woman clucked sympathetically. "You'll stay here as long as you need," Martha assured her, pressing a cup of sweet tea into her hands. "Wilson isn't much, but we look after our own here." "But I'm not," Wilhelmina began. "You are now," Martha interrupted firmly. "Anyone fleeing from that Blackwell scum is welcome in my house." Vincent cleared his throat. "I should get back to my office, send some telegrams about the gang's movements. Mrs. Zeller, I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right." Exhausted as she was, Wilhelmina felt a pang at his departure. This man had saved her life, had shown kindness when she'd all but given up hope of finding it again. "Thank you, Sheriff Drake," she said, meeting his eyes. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Something passed between them, then a moment of recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Vincent smiled, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "No repayment necessary, madam, just doing my job." He tipped his hat again. "Rest well. You're safe here." As he left, Wilhelmina allowed Martha to usher her to a small but clean room upstairs where a bed awaited. After bathing both herself and Eliza in the hot water Martha provided, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, her daughter nestled safely against her. For the first time in days, she slept without fear. Morning arrived with golden sunlight filtering through thin curtains and the distant sounds of a town coming to life. For a moment, Wilhelmina was disoriented, expecting to wake on the hard ground beneath the wagon. Then memory returned. The sheriff, the boarding house, safety. Eliza stirred beside her, making small, contented noises rather than the distressed cries of the previous days. The baby's cheeks had more color this morning, and when she opened her eyes, she offered her mother a toothless smile that brought tears to Wilhelmina's eyes. "We made it, little one," she whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. A knock at the door was followed by Martha's voice. "Mrs. Zeller, I've got breakfast ready when you are and some clean clothes that might fit you." Wilhelmina opened the door to find the older woman holding a bundle of fabric. "These belong to my daughter," Martha explained. "She's in Omaha now with her husband, about your size, I'd say." Gratitude welled up in Wilhelmina's throat. "Thank you for everything." "I don't know what we would have done." Martha waved away her thanks. "Get dressed and come eat. You're too thin by half, and if you're nursing that baby, you need your strength." The clothes, a simple brown skirt and white blouse, were indeed a good fit, if a bit loose on Wilhelmina's frame, which had grown thin during the journey west. After dressing and tidying her hair as best she could, she carried Eliza downstairs to the kitchen. The boarding house was quiet, the other residents apparently already gone about their day's business. Martha set a plate of eggs, bacon, and biscuits before Wilhelmina, along with a cup of strong coffee. "Eat," she instructed. "Then we can talk about what comes next." What comes next? The words hung in the air as Wilhelmina ate. She had no plan beyond reaching Wilson, no money beyond the few dollars sewn into the hem of her dress, no skills that would easily translate to earning a living in this frontier town. Samuel had been a banker, and their plan had been to open a branch in a growing western settlement, but without him. "I need work," she said finally, "and a more permanent place to stay. I can't impose on your kindness forever." Martha studied her over the rim of her coffee cup. "What can you do?" "I can read and write well. I kept the books for my husband's business back east. I can sew, though not professionally. I'm a quick learner." She paused. "I'll do whatever is necessary to provide for my daughter." A look of approval crossed Martha's face. "Good, no self-pity." "That will serve you well here." She considered for a moment. "The general store might need help. Mr. Thompson's eyesight isn't what it was, and his ledgers are a mess. Or there's the school. We've had no teacher since Miss Collins married last spring." Hope flickered in Wilhelmina's chest. "I taught briefly before I married. Children of all ages in a one-room schoolhouse in Pennsylvania." "Then that's where we'll start," Martha decided, standing to clear the dishes. "The town council meets tonight. I'll speak with them about reopening the school with you as teacher." Wilhelmina's protest died on her lips when Martha fixed her with a stern look. "You need work. The children need education. It makes sense." "Thank you," she said instead. Martha nodded once, satisfied. "Now, since you'll likely be staying in Wilson, we should get you properly introduced." Most everyone stops by the general store at some point during the day. We'll start there. After helping to wash the breakfast dishes, Wilhelmina prepared Eliza for an outing. The day was warm, but not unpleasantly so, with a gentle breeze carrying the scents of pine from the distant hills and something cooking from the direction of the saloon. Wilson's main street consisted of just a dozen or so buildings, with the general store situated prominently in the middle. As they approached, Wilhelmina noticed a familiar figure tying his horse to the hitching post outside Sheriff Drake. He looked up at their approach, and something in his expression made Wilhelmina's heart beat a little faster. Recognition, certainly, but also something warmer. "Mrs. Zeller," he greeted, removing his hat. "I was just coming to check on you. I'm glad to see you up and about." "Sheriff Drake has been asking after you all morning," Martha remarked with a sly smile. "Stopped by the boarding house before you were awake." A flush crept up Vincent's neck. "Just doing my duty, madam, making sure Mrs. Zeller and her daughter are settling in." "We are, thank you," Wilhelmina replied, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. "Thanks to your timely arrival yesterday and Mrs. Caldwell's kindness." Vincent's eyes moved to Eliza, who was regarding him with solemn curiosity. "She looks better today, not so frightened." "Children are resilient," Wilhelmina said softly, "and she's too young to understand what happened to her father." A shadow crossed Vincent's face. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Zeller, truly. Please call me Wilhelmina." The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. "Wilhelmina," he repeated, and something about the way he said her name made it sound like something precious. "I'd be honored if you'd call me Vincent then." Martha cleared her throat. "If you two are quite finished, I was about to introduce our new friend to Mr. Thompson." Vincent gestured toward the store's entrance. "After you, ladies." The general store was a marvel of organization despite its cluttered appearance. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, stocked with everything from canned goods to fabric, tools to penny candy. A counter ran along the back, behind which stood a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "George," Martha called, "I've brought you a new customer. This is Mrs. Zeller and her daughter Eliza. They'll be staying in Wilson." Mr. Thompson peered over his glasses at them. "Welcome, madam. Any friend of Martha's is welcome here." "Mrs. Zeller had some trouble on the trail," Vincent explained, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Blackwell gang. They killed her husband." Thompson's expression darkened. "Those bastards, begging your pardon, madam. They've been a plague on honest travelers for too long. I've sent telegrams to the marshals in Omaha and Fort Kearney," Vincent said. "And I'll be organizing a posse if they're spotted near Wilson again." "Count me in," Thompson declared, then turned back to Wilhelmina. "Anything you need, Mrs. Zeller, you just ask. We take care of our own here." There it was again, that immediate acceptance, the inclusion of her in this hour, despite her being a stranger. Wilhelmina felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she managed. "Actually, I was hoping. That is, Martha suggested I might inquire about work." "I understand the school has been closed." Thompson's bushy eyebrows rose. "You're a teacher." "Well, that's providential. The children have been running wild since Miss Collins left. Parents are at their wits' end." "I taught for 3 years before my marriage," Wilhelmina confirmed. "I'd be glad to resume the profession if the town council approves." "Oh, they'll approve," Thompson assured her. "Mayor Jenkins's twin boys are the worst of the lot. He'd hire almost anyone who could keep them occupied for a few hours a day." Vincent chuckled. "The Jenkins boys are a handful, that's true, but we've got some good kids in town who deserve an education." "How many students would there be?" Wilhelmina asked. "About 20, ranging from 6 to 16, Thompson replied. "The older ones only come when farm work allows, of course." Wilhelmina nodded thoughtfully. 20 students across 10 grade levels would be challenging, but not impossible. And the salary, modest as it would likely be, would allow her to support herself and Eliza. "I'll speak to the council tonight," Martha promised. "In the meantime, why don't we show you the schoolhouse, So you know what you're getting into. The tour of Wilson continued, with Vincent accompanying them. The schoolhouse was a simple one-room building on the edge of town, dusty from disuse but solidly built. The church, pastored by Reverend Walsh, stood nearby. They passed the blacksmith shop where a burly man named Peterson nodded in greeting, and the small doctor's office where Dr. Ellis, a surprisingly young man with a scholar's pallor, was introduced. Throughout the walk, Wilhelmina was aware of Vincent's steady presence beside her. He walked with one hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings, alert for any threat. Yet when he spoke to her, his full attention was on her face as though memorizing her features. "The town's growing," he told her as they paused at the edge of the settlement, looking out at the scattered farms beyond. 5 years ago, there were just a handful of buildings. Now we've got nearly 200 residents counting the outlying homesteads. "What brought you here?" Wilhelmina asked, curious about this man who had saved her life. Vincent's expression grew distant. "The war. After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Virginia. Too many ghosts." He glanced down at her. "I drifted west, worked as a ranch hand for a while, ended up here 3 years ago when the previous sheriff was killed in a robbery. Town council asked me to pin on the badge, and I've been here since." "It suits you," she observed. "The role of protector." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "I try to do right by these people. They've given me a home when I thought I'd never have one again." The simplicity of the statement, the echo of her own sense of displacement, created a bond between them that Wilhelmina felt almost as a physical thing. She shifted Eliza to her other arm, and Vincent immediately stepped closer. "May I?" he asked, holding out his hands. Hesitantly, Wilhelmina passed her daughter to him. Vincent cradled the infant with unexpected gentleness, his large hands careful and sure. "Hello, Miss Eliza," he said softly. "Welcome to Wilson." Eliza regarded him solemnly for a moment, then reached up to pat his stubbled cheek. A grin broke across Vincent's face, transforming his features from handsome to breathtaking. "She likes you," Wilhelmina remarked, surprised by the pleasure this gave her. "Smart girl," Martha commented dryly from behind them. "Now, if you two are done making eyes at each other, we should head back. I've got dinner to prepare, and Vincent, don't you have a town to sheriff?" Vincent cleared his throat, carefully handing Eliza back to her mother. "Yes, madam." "I should check in at the office, see if there are any replies to my telegrams." "Will you come by later?" Wilhelmina asked, then felt heat rise in her cheeks at her own boldness. "I mean, if there's news about the men who attacked us." Vincent's smile returned, smaller but no less warm. "I'll stop by the boarding house this evening, after the council meeting." As they walked back toward town, Wilhelmina found herself smiling despite the uncertainty of her situation. Perhaps Wilson could indeed become home for both her and Eliza. The town council meeting was held in the back room of the saloon, the only space in Wilson large enough to accommodate such gatherings. While Martha attended to speak on her behalf, Wilhelmina remained at the boarding house with Eliza, too tired from the day's activities to venture out again. She was sitting in the small parlor, nursing Eliza before bed, when the front door opened and voices filled the entryway. Martha entered first, followed by a middle-aged man with a neat beard who was introduced as Mayor Jenkins, and behind him Vincent. "Mrs. Zeller," the mayor greeted her, tactfully averting his eyes from the nursing infant. "I'm pleased to meet you, though sorry for the circumstances that brought you to our town." Wilhelmina adjusted her shawl to cover herself and Eliza more completely. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mayor Jenkins." "Not at all, not at all." He waved a hand dismissively. Martha has explained your situation, and the council has voted unanimously to reopen the school with you as teacher, effective immediately. Relief washed over her. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. The salary is $30 a month, Jenkins continued. Not princely, I know, but it includes the use of the small house behind the schoolhouse. It's just one bedroom, a kitchen, and a sitting room, but it would be yours for as long as you hold the position. A home of her own. Wilhelmina could scarcely believe her good fortune. That's more than generous, she said, her voice thick with emotion. There's a small garden plot, too, Martha added. You can grow vegetables in season, and I'll help you get settled. We'll have the place cleaned up and ready by the end of the week, Jenkins promised. Classes can begin next Monday. Will that give you enough time to prepare? Yes, absolutely. Wilhelmina's mind was already racing with plans, lessons to organize, books to review, supplies to gather. Excellent. Jenkins beamed. Now, I should get home before my wife sends out a search party. Sheriff Drake has kindly offered to escort me, though I suspect he has another reason for lingering. The mayor winked broadly at Vincent, who looked embarrassed but didn't contradict him. After Jenkins had departed, Vincent remained in the doorway, hat in hand. I wanted to let you know, he said quietly. I heard back from Fort Kearney. The marshals are organizing a proper hunt for the Blackwell gang. In the meantime, I've arranged for extra patrols around town. Do you think they'll come back? Wilhelmina asked, unconsciously holding Eliza tighter. Vincent's expression grew serious. I can't say for certain they won't, but it's unlikely. They tend to avoid established settlements, preferring to prey on travelers. Still, I'd rather be cautious. Martha, who had been listening from the doorway to the kitchen, spoke up. Vincent, since you're here, perhaps you could help me move that heavy trunk in the storeroom. I've been meaning to get to it for ages. It was a transparent excuse to leave Wilhelmina and Vincent alone, but neither commented as Martha disappeared down the hallway, expecting him to follow. Vincent hesitated, then took a step into the parlor. I wanted to say. He began, then paused, seeming to search for words. I'm glad you're staying in Wilson. You and Eliza. The simple statement, delivered with such evident sincerity, touched Wilhelmina deeply. So am I, she replied softly. Vincent moved closer, taking a seat in the chair opposite hers. I know it's forward of me, and you're in mourning, but I'd like to call on you properly. When you're ready. The unexpected declaration left Wilhelmina momentarily speechless. It had been less than 2 days since her arrival in Wilson, less than a week since Samuel's death. Yet the connection she felt with Vincent Drake was undeniable. I don't know when I'll be ready, she admitted finally. Everything has happened so quickly. Samuel and we had our difficulties, but he was a good man. He didn't deserve to die like that. Vincent nodded, his expression understanding rather than disappointed. Of course, I'm not asking for anything now, just the possibility of something someday. Eliza, who had fallen asleep at her breast, stirred slightly. Wilhelmina adjusted her, grateful for the moment to collect her thoughts. I would like that, she said at last, meeting Vincent's gaze. The possibility. His smile was like the sunrise, gradual then brilliant. That's all I ask. Martha's voice called from the hallway, breaking the moment. Vincent, are you planning to help me with this trunk or not? He rose, still smiling. Coming, Martha. To Wilhelmina he added, I'll see you tomorrow. Good night, Wilhelmina. Good night, Vincent. As he left the room, Wilhelmina looked down at her sleeping daughter and whispered, What do you think of him, Eliza? He did save us after all. The baby sighed in her sleep, which Wilhelmina chose to interpret as approval. The following days passed in a whirl of activity. Martha proved invaluable, introducing Wilhelmina to the other women of Wilson and helping her prepare for her role as the town's teacher. The schoolhouse was cleaned from top to bottom, with several mothers volunteering their time to wash windows, sweep floors, and dust shelves. The small house behind the school was likewise transformed. Years of disuse had left it dusty and neglected, but a team of townspeople, led by Vincent, worked to make it habitable again. He replaced broken window panes, fixed the sagging front steps, and even built a cradle for Eliza, working on it in the evenings after his duties were done. When he presented it to her, 3 days after her arrival in Wilson, Wilhelmina was touched beyond words. The cradle was simple but beautifully made, sanded smooth and polished to a soft glow. "I'm not much of a craftsman," Vincent said modestly as she ran her fingers over the wood. "But every baby needs a proper place to sleep." "It's perfect," she told him, meaning it. "Thank you, Vincent." He ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by her praise. It was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. It was tangible proof of his care, of the community's acceptance, of the possibility that Wilson might truly become home. By Saturday, the house was ready. It was sparsely furnished: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the hearth, and now Eliza's cradle, but it was clean and bright, with curtains sewn by Martha from fabric donated by Mr. Thompson. "It's not much," Martha apologized as they stood in the small sitting room. "It's everything," Wilhelmina corrected her, eyes filling with tears. "I never expected such kindness from strangers," Martha snorted. "We're hardly strangers now, are we? You're one of us, Wilhelmina Zeller. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be." That evening, Vincent and Danny helped move Wilhelmina's few possessions from the boarding house to her new home. As darkness fell, she found herself standing on the front porch with Vincent, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. "Are you nervous?" "About starting school on Monday?" he asked. Wilhelmina considered the question. "A little. It's been some time since I taught, but mostly I'm grateful for the opportunity." "The children are excited, even the Jenkins twins, though they'd never admit it." Vincent chuckled. "They've been asking when they'll meet their new teacher. I hope I live up to their expectations." Vincent turned to face her, his expression serious in the gathering darkness. "You will. You're stronger than you know, Wilhelmina, to survive what you've been through, to start over like this." "I had help," she reminded him. "Yes, but the courage was yours." He hesitated, then added, "I admire you." The simple declaration warmed her more than elaborate compliments ever could. "Thank you for saying that." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, then Vincent spoke again. "I should go. You need your rest before the big day tomorrow." Impulsively, Wilhelmina reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you for everything." His hand covered hers briefly, warm and steady. "Good night, Wilhelmina." As she watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the twilight, Wilhelmina felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with anxiety about her new position. It was too soon, far too soon, to be feeling such things. Yet she couldn't deny the growing attraction, the sense of rightness she felt in Vincent's presence. With a sigh, she went inside to check on Eliza, pushing thoughts of the handsome sheriff to the back of her mind. There would be time enough to consider such matters once she had established herself in Wilson, once the raw wound of Samuel's death had begun to heal. For now, she had a school to prepare for, and 20 children counting on her to provide the education they deserved. Monday dawned clear and cool, a perfect September morning. Wilhelmina had been awake since before sunrise, reviewing her lesson plans and preparing the schoolhouse for its first students in months. She had dressed with care in one of the 2 dresses Martha had helped her make over the weekend, a sensible navy blue with white collar and cuffs. Her hair was neatly pinned up, and she had polished her 1 pair of good boots until they shone. Eliza, fed and content, dozed in her cradle in the corner of the schoolroom, where Wilhelmina could keep an eye on her during classes. At precisely 8 o'clock, she rang the school bell that hung outside the door. The sound echoed across the town, and within minutes, children began to arrive, some walking from homes in town, others riding in on ponies or in wagons driven by parents from outlying farms. They filed into the schoolroom, eyes wide with curiosity as they regarded their new teacher. The younger children were openly curious, while the older ones affected an air of disinterest that didn't quite hide their interest. "Good morning," Wilhelmina greeted them. "I'm Mrs. Zeller, your new teacher. Welcome to school." A chorus of "Good morning, Mrs. Zeller" answered her with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "Before we begin, I'd like each of you to introduce yourselves, so I can learn your names and a little about you." She smiled encouragingly at a small girl in the front row. "Would you like to start?" The morning passed quickly, as Wilhelmina assessed her students' levels and organized them into groups based on their abilities rather than strictly by age. The Jenkins twins, 10-year-old boys with identical mischievous grins, did indeed prove to be a handful, but they responded well to being given responsibilities, ringing the bell for recess, distributing slates and chalk. At noon, the children went home for dinner, the midday meal that was the main repast of the day for most families. Wilhelmina used the break to feed and change Eliza, eat a simple meal of bread and cheese, and prepare for the afternoon session. She was arranging books on her desk when a knock at the open door drew her attention. Vincent stood there, looking slightly hesitant. "I thought I'd check how your first morning went," he explained, "and I brought you this." He held out a small posy of wildflowers. "For your desk." Wilhelmina accepted the flowers, touched by the simple gesture. "That's very thoughtful, thank you." "So," he prompted. "How was it?" "Challenging," she admitted, "but in a good way. The children are bright if a bit undisciplined after months without formal schooling." Vincent nodded. "They're good kids at heart. Even the Jenkins boys, though they'd try the patience of a saint." Wilhelmina laughed. "They've already tried to put a frog in my desk drawer, but I caught them in the act. And I suggested they might prefer to study frogs as a natural science lesson rather than as a prank. They seemed intrigued by the idea." Vincent's laughter joined hers. "Clever. You may make scholars of them yet." The bell in the town square began to toll, signaling that it was nearly 1 o'clock. "I should go," Vincent said reluctantly. "Duty calls." "Of course." Wilhelmina placed the flowers in a jar of water on her desk. "Thank you for checking in, and for these." As he turned to leave, Eliza began to cry from her cradle. Without hesitation, Vincent crossed to the corner and picked her up, his large hands gentle as he cradled her against his chest. "What's all this fuss about, little lady?" he murmured. And to Wilhelmina's amazement, Eliza quieted immediately, staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. "She likes you," Wilhelmina observed, moving to stand beside them. Vincent's smile was soft as he gazed down at the infant. "The feeling is mutual." His eyes lifted to meet Wilhelmina's. "She looks like you, same determined chin." The observation was so unexpected, so personal, that Wilhelmina felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Most people say she favors her father." A shadow crossed Vincent's face at the mention of Samuel, but he nodded. "I never met him, so I couldn't say, but she has your eyes, I think." Before Wilhelmina could respond, the sound of children's voices approaching signaled the end of the dinner break. Vincent carefully handed Eliza back to her. "I'll see you later," he promised, then strode out the door, nodding to the returning students as he passed. The afternoon session went as smoothly as could be expected, with only minor disruptions as the children adjusted to being back in school. By 4 o'clock, when she dismissed them for the day, Wilhelmina was exhausted but satisfied. She had made a start, and that was what mattered. As the weeks passed, Wilhelmina fell into a routine. Mornings were spent teaching. Afternoons were dedicated to working with smaller groups of students who needed extra help or were advanced beyond their years. Evenings were for grading papers, preparing lessons, and caring for Eliza. And increasingly, spending time with Vincent. It began with his regular visits to the schoolhouse, ostensibly to check on security or deliver messages from the town council. Then came invitations to Sunday dinner at the boarding house, where Martha made it clear that both Wilhelmina and Vincent were expected to attend. In October, he began escorting her to church each week, waiting outside her small house promptly at 9 every Sunday morning, hat in hand and boots freshly polished. Reverend Walsh, a kindly man with a tendency toward brief sermons, for which his congregation was grateful, always greeted them with a knowing smile that made Wilhelmina blush. The townsfolk, far from judging her for accepting Vincent's attentions while still technically in mourning, seemed to approve of the developing relationship. Perhaps it was the frontier mentality, where practicality often overrode social conventions, or perhaps it was simply that they liked both Wilhelmina and Vincent and wanted to see them happy. For her part, Wilhelmina found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet sheriff. He was a man of few words but deep feeling, his actions speaking louder than any declarations. He fixed loose boards on her porch without being asked, brought firewood before she realized she was running low, and always treated her with a respect that bordered on reverence. With Eliza, he was endlessly patient, holding the baby for hours while Wilhelmina graded papers or prepared meals. As autumn deepened toward winter, and Eliza began to sit up on her own and babble her first consonants, it was Vincent who celebrated each milestone as though the child were his own. It was during the first snowfall of the season, in late November, that Wilhelmina finally acknowledged to herself the truth of her feelings. They were sitting by the fire in her small house, Vincent in the single armchair and Wilhelmina on the floor, watching as Eliza attempted to crawl on a quilt spread before the hearth. "She's determined," Vincent observed as the baby pushed herself up on chubby arms, only to flop back onto her belly with a frustrated grunt. "Like her mother," Wilhelmina agreed, smiling as Eliza tried again. "Samuel always said I was the most stubborn woman he'd ever met." It was the first time she had mentioned her late husband in weeks, and Vincent's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you miss him?" he asked quietly. The question deserved an honest answer. Wilhelmina considered for a long moment. "I miss the security of being married," she said finally. "I miss having a partner in raising Eliza, but Samuel and I—" She hesitated. "Our marriage was more of a practical arrangement than a love match. He needed a wife to help advance his career, and I needed to leave my father's house." Vincent nodded, encouraging her to continue. "He wasn't unkind," she clarified, "just distant, more interested in his business than in family life. When I discovered I was expecting Eliza, he was pleased in an abstract sort of way, but he never felt real to him, I think, even after she was born." "I'm sorry," Vincent said simply. Wilhelmina shrugged. "It was what I expected from marriage. My own parents had a similar relationship. That's not how it should be." There was an intensity in Vincent's voice that drew her eyes to his face. Marriage should be a partnership in every sense, a sharing of life, of dreams, of... He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "Forgive me, I'm overstepping." "No," Wilhelmina said softly. "You're not." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing for weeks, perhaps since that first night when he had found her beneath the wagon. Vincent leaned forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. "Wilhelmina." A sharp knock at the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. With a muttered apology, Vincent rose to answer it, his hand instinctively moving to the gun at his hip. It was Danny, the young deputy, his face flushed from cold and exertion. "Sheriff, there's been a sighting. The Blackwell gang about 10 miles east of town." The peaceful moment shattered. Vincent's expression hardened, the gentle man who had been playing with Eliza transformed instantly into the lawman. "When?" he demanded. "This afternoon. A farmer spotted them making camp in that abandoned homestead by Cottonwood Creek. He recognized Blackwell himself, said the scar was unmistakable." Vincent nodded grimly. "Get Peterson, Thompson, and any other men who can ride. Meet me at the office in 20 minutes. Danny nodded and hurried off into the swirling snow. Vincent turned back to Wilhelmina, who had risen to her feet, Eliza clutched protectively in her arms. "They've found us," she whispered, fear constricting her throat. Vincent crossed to her in 2 strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. "No, they haven't found you. They're just passing through the area, but I'm going to make damn sure they never come near Wilson again." "Vincent, no, it's too dangerous. You saw what they did to Samuel, to the others in our party. I've dealt with men like Blackwell before." His voice was steel. "And I won't be alone. We'll have the element of surprise on our side." Wilhelmina's eyes filled with tears. "Please don't go. Send for the marshals. Wait for reinforcements. By then, they'll be gone. This may be our only chance to end the threat they pose." His thumbs gently wiped away the tears that had begun to spill down her cheeks. "I'll be careful, I promise." "Don't make promises you can't keep," she whispered. Vincent's gaze softened. "Then I'll promise this: I will come back to you, to both of you." He looked down at Eliza, who was watching him with solemn eyes. "I have too much to live for now." Before Wilhelmina could respond, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, tender kiss that held both promise and farewell. "Lock the door behind me," he instructed as he released her. "Don't open it for anyone but Martha or me. If we're not back by morning, take Eliza to the boarding house and stay there until you hear from us." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Vincent kissed her once more, then Eliza's forehead before striding to the door, his face set with determination. "Vincent," Wilhelmina called as he stepped outside. When he turned back, she found her voice at last. "I love you. Please remember that." A smile broke across his face, brilliant despite the gravity of the moment. "I'll remember. And when I come back, I'll say the words to you properly." Then he was gone, swallowed by the swirling snow, leaving Wilhelmina alone with her fears and the echoing memory of his kiss. The night passed with excruciating slowness. Wilhelmina paced the small house, alternating between praying and cursing the men who had brought such danger into their lives. Eliza, sensing her mother's distress, was fretful, refusing to sleep for more than a few minutes at a time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, piling up against the windows and door, muffling all sounds from the town. Wilhelmina imagined Vincent and the others riding through the storm, facing who knew what dangers in the darkness, and her heart constricted with fear. By dawn, the snow had stopped, but there was still no word. Following Vincent's instructions, Wilhelmina bundled Eliza warmly and made her way through the knee-deep drifts to the boarding house. Martha opened the door at her knock, her face lined with worry. "No news?" Wilhelmina asked, already knowing the answer. Martha shook her head. "Not yet. But that doesn't mean anything bad has happened. The snow would slow them down and they'd be foolish to travel in the dark if they didn't have to. The explanation was logical, but it did little to ease Wilhelmina's fears. She spent the morning in Martha's kitchen, mechanically helping to prepare food that neither of them had the appetite to eat, jumping at every sound from outside. Around noon, as Martha was brewing yet another pot of coffee, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. Wilhelmina was at the window in an instant, straining to see through the glare of sunlight on snow. Riders appeared at the edge of town, 5, 6, 7 of them. Too many to be just the posse. And they were moving slowly, one horse pulling what looked like a makeshift sled behind it. "Martha," Wilhelmina called, her voice tight with fear. "They're back." The older woman joined her at the window, squinting against the bright light. "I can't make out who's who." "There's someone on that sled. Someone injured." Wilhelmina's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Without waiting for Martha's response, she grabbed her coat and hurried outside, heedless of the cold. The riders drew closer, and now she could see that several of them were strangers, roughly dressed men with their hands bound before them. Prisoners, she realized. The posse had been successful. Her eyes frantically searched for Vincent among the returning men. There was Thompson, his rifle across his saddle. Peterson, the blacksmith, his broad shoulders unmistakable. Danny, looking exhausted but proud. And there, at the back of the group, leading the horse that pulled the sled, was Vincent. Alive. Unharmed. Relief made Wilhelmina's knees weak, and she sagged against the porch post for support. He was safe. He had kept his promise. The group halted in the town square, and a small crowd began to gather despite the cold. Mayor Jenkins emerged from his office, and Dr. Ellis hurried from his surgery, medical bag in hand. 4 prisoners, Vincent announced to the assembled townsfolk, including Blackwell himself. He gestured to a man on the sled who was clearly injured but conscious, his face twisted in a mixture of pain and hatred. The scar that ran from temple to chin was vivid against his pale skin. A murmur ran through the crowd. Wilhelmina stared at the man who had murdered her husband, who had pursued her with such malevolence. He seemed smaller somehow, less menacing now that he was captured, bound, and wounded. "There were 7 in total," Vincent continued. 3 chose to resist arrest. His tone made it clear what had happened to those 3. "We'll hold these 4 in the jail until the marshals can come from Fort Kearney to collect them." As the prisoners were led away to the small jailhouse, Vincent dismounted and handed the reins of his horse to Danny. His eyes found Wilhelmina in the crowd, and the relief on his face mirrored her own. In a few long strides, he reached her. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as though he never intended to let go. Wilhelmina clung to him, feeling the solid reality of him alive, safe, returned to her as promised. "You're here," she murmured against his chest. "You're really here. I promised, didn't I?" His voice was rough with exhaustion, but there was a note of triumph in it too. "And I have something important to tell you." Pulling back slightly, Wilhelmina looked up into his face. Despite the weariness etched into his features, his eyes were bright with an emotion she recognized because it matched what was in her own heart. "I love you, Wilhelmina Zeller," Vincent said, his voice clear enough for anyone nearby to hear. "I think I've loved you since I first saw you under that wagon, protecting your daughter with everything you had." Tears filled Wilhelmina's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I thought possible." Vincent's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned down, clearly intending to kiss her, but Martha's voice interrupted. "For heaven's sake, get inside before you both catch your death," she scolded, though her eyes were suspiciously bright. "Vincent Drake, you look dead on your feet, And Wilhelmina, your daughter, is wondering where you've disappeared to." With a chuckle, Vincent kept one arm around Wilhelmina's waist as they turned toward the boarding house. "Yes, madam," he said meekly. Inside, in the warmth of Martha's kitchen, Vincent recounted what had happened. The posse had reached the abandoned homestead just after midnight, approaching cautiously through the storm. The Blackwell gang, overconfident and half-drunk, had posted only a single guard who was easily subdued. "We took 3 of them in their sleep," Vincent explained, cradling a cup of coffee in his hands. "But Blackwell and the others woke up during the commotion. There was a fight. Blackwell took a bullet in the shoulder from Thompson before we managed to subdue him." "And you?" Wilhelmina asked, her eyes scanning him for injuries she might have missed. "Not a scratch," he assured her. "Though I'm sore in places I didn't know could be sore. Riding through a blizzard will do that." Martha snorted. "You're lucky that's all you got, taking on those outlaws like that." "We had right on our side," Vincent said simply. Later, after he had eaten and rested a bit, Vincent walked Wilhelmina and Eliza back to their house. The town was quiet, the excitement of the morning's events having given way to routine as the citizens of Wilson returned to their daily tasks, secure in the knowledge that the threat had been eliminated. "What happens now?" Wilhelmina asked as they reached her door. "The marshals will come for the prisoners. There'll be a trial, though the outcome isn't much in doubt. Blackwell and his men have a long list of crimes to answer for from here to Kansas City." And then, Vincent understood her real question. "And then we continue living. Building something here in Wilson." He took her hand in his. "Together, if you'll have me." Wilhelmina looked up at him, this man who had saved her life in more ways than one. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Vincent Drake?" A flush crept up his neck, but he didn't look away. "I am. I know it's soon. I know you've been through more in the past few months than anyone should have to endure in a lifetime. But I love you, Wilhelmina. I love Eliza as though she were my own, and I want to spend my life with both of you." Joy, pure and unexpected, filled Wilhelmina's heart. "Yes," she said simply. Vincent blinked as though he had expected more resistance. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." She smiled up at him, feeling lighter than she had in months, perhaps years. "On one condition. Name it. Don't ever scare me like that again." "No more riding out after dangerous outlaws in blizzards." Vincent laughed, the sound rich and full in the clear winter air. "I'll do my best, though I can't promise to stop being sheriff. It's who I am." "I know," Wilhelmina said softly, "and I wouldn't change that about you. Just be careful. For us." In answer, Vincent pulled her close, bending to kiss her with a tenderness that spoke of promises kept and a future filled with love. They were married on Christmas Day, in the small church decorated with pine boughs and red berries for the holiday. Reverend Walsh performed the ceremony, beaming as he pronounced them husband and wife before the entire population of Wilson, who had turned out to celebrate despite the cold. Wilhelmina wore a dress of deep green velvet, a gift from the women of the town who had pooled their resources to order the fabric from Omaha. Vincent, resplendent in a new black suit, looked at her as though she were the most precious thing he had ever seen as she walked down the aisle to join him. Eliza, now nearly 9 months old and recently taking her first tentative steps, was held by Martha during the ceremony, though she reached for Vincent the moment it was over, clearly recognizing him as her father in all the ways that mattered. The celebration that followed at the saloon, closed to regular business for the occasion, lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and more food than Wilhelmina had seen since leaving the East. The townspeople's generosity overwhelmed her gifts of household items, preserves, hand-knitted blankets, and even a milk cow from Mayor Jenkins and his wife. "You've made quite an impression on Wilson," Vincent murmured as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "They love you almost as much as I do." "They love us," Wilhelmina corrected him. "Both of us, all three of us." It was true. In the short time since her arrival, Wilhelmina had become an integral part of the community, respected for her skills as a teacher, and admired for her courage in rebuilding her life after tragedy. And Vincent, already beloved as the town's protector, seemed to walk taller now, his natural reserve giving way to a quiet happiness that was evident to all who knew him. As the evening drew to a close, they returned to what was now their home, Vincent having moved his few possessions into Wilhelmina's small house the week before. Martha had offered to keep Eliza overnight, but Wilhelmina couldn't bear to be separated from her daughter on this of all nights. "We're a family now," she explained to Vincent as they tucked the sleeping child into her cradle. "All of us together, from the very beginning." Vincent's arm slipped around her waist as they stood watching Eliza sleep. "I never thought I'd have this," he confessed quietly. "After the war I was so lost. I didn't think I deserved happiness, let alone a family. And now," Wilhelmina turned in his embrace to look up at him. His smile was answer enough, but he spoke the words anyway. "Now I know that sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when you don't know you're looking for it. Like finding a woman and her baby under a wagon," Wilhelmina teased gently. Vincent's expression grew serious. "Exactly like that. When I saw you there, protecting Eliza with everything you had, I knew you were someone special, someone worth protecting. And now I know you're someone worth loving, worth building a life with." He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch infinitely gentle. "Worth everything." As he bent to kiss her, Wilhelmina reflected on the strange, winding path that had led her to this moment. The loss and fear that had brought her to Wilson had been transformed into something beautiful, a new family, a community that had embraced her, a love she had never dared to dream of. Her baby had been crying under the wagon, and the cowboy had said they were safe. And against all odds, he had been right. Spring came early to Wilson in 1868, bringing with it new beginnings. The schoolhouse, now painted a cheerful white with green trim, Vincent's doing during the quiet winter months, was filled with the sounds of children learning and laughing. Wilhelmina, growing slightly rounder with the child she and Vincent were expecting in late summer, moved among her students with a quiet joy that infected everyone around her. The town itself was growing. A new family had arrived just last week from Ohio, and there were rumors of a railroad spur that might come through within the next few years. Mayor Jenkins spoke optimistically of Wilson becoming a proper city someday, though Martha scoffed at such grand dreams. "We're just fine as we are," she declared when the subject came up at Sunday dinner. "A good, honest town with good, honest people." Vincent, seated beside Wilhelmina with Eliza on his knee, nodded in agreement. "There's something to be said for knowing your neighbors," he observed. "For being part of a community rather than just a dot on a map." "Still," Mayor Jenkins argued, "progress is inevitable and beneficial. Think of the opportunities for trade, for cultural enrichment." The debate continued good-naturedly as they enjoyed Martha's roast beef and apple pie, but Wilhelmina found her attention drawn to her husband and daughter. Vincent was showing Eliza how to build a tower with small wooden blocks, his large hands guiding her tiny ones with infinite patience. The child's laughter when the tower inevitably toppled was a sound that never failed to warm Wilhelmina's heart. "Pa," Eliza squealed, her limited vocabulary expanding daily. Again, Vincent obliged, helping her stack the blocks once more. He glanced up to find Wilhelmina watching them, a smile spreading across his face when their eyes met. "She's going to be an architect at this rate," he commented. "Or a demolition expert." Wilhelmina laughed. "With your influence, probably both. You've been building or fixing something every day since I met you." It was true. Beyond his duties as sheriff, Vincent seemed happiest when he was creating or repairing. Over the winter, he had built additional shelves for the schoolhouse, repaired the church roof, and expanded their small house to include a second bedroom for Eliza, and eventually, the new baby. "I like making things better," he said simply. "Safer, more beautiful." His eyes, warm and loving, held hers. "It's what you do too in your own way, making the children's lives better through education, making this town more beautiful just by being in it." Even after months of marriage, his words could still make her blush. "You're a flatterer, Vincent Drake." "Just honest," he countered with a grin. Their exchange was interrupted by Martha calling for help clearing the table. As they rose to assist, Mayor Jenkins caught Vincent's arm. "Before I forget, a telegram came yesterday from Fort Kearney. The trial's been set for next month. They'll want you to testify." Vincent nodded, his expression growing serious. "I expected as much. I'll make arrangements to be away for a few days." Wilhelmina felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of him traveling alone to testify against the Blackwell gang, but she pushed it aside. This was part of who Vincent was, a man who stood up for what was right, who followed through on his responsibilities. It was one of the many reasons she loved him. "I'll come with you," she said, the words surprising even her. Vincent looked startled. "Are you sure?" "It's a long journey and in your condition." "I'm having a baby, not an illness," Wilhelmina reminded him with a smile. "And I want to see this through. For Samuel's sake, for the others who were killed, for closure." After a moment's consideration, Vincent nodded. "All right, we'll go together. Martha can look after Eliza and the school for a few days." "Already volunteering me for duties, are you?" Martha grumbled good-naturedly from the kitchen doorway. "Though I suppose someone has to keep things running while you two are off seeking justice." As they walked home later, Eliza dozing against Vincent's shoulder, Wilhelmina felt a profound sense of peace. The past couldn't be changed, Samuel, and the others would never be brought back, but the future stretched before them, full of promise. "What are you thinking about?" Vincent asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "How different things might have been," she admitted. "If you hadn't found us that night, if you hadn't been the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger." Vincent was quiet for a moment, considering. "I believe some things are meant to be," he said finally. "Not that what happened to your husband was fate. Evil men make evil choices and they'll answer for them. But us finding each other, maybe that was always supposed to happen, even under such terrible circumstances. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the darkest soil." He shifted Eliza gently in his arms. "Look at her, born into one world, now thriving in another. Looking at her, could you wish anything had happened differently?" Wilhelmina rested her hand on her swelling belly, feeling the flutter of new life within. "No," she said softly. "I couldn't." They reached their house just as the sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. As Vincent unlocked the door, Wilhelmina paused to look out at the vista stretching before them, the town of Wilson in the foreground, the endless plains beyond, the distant hills where the sun now touched the horizon. This was home now. Not the East with its rigid social structures and stifled opportunities. Not the trail with its dangers and hardships. But here, in this small frontier town where she had found not just safety but belonging, not just shelter but love. "Coming?" Vincent asked from the doorway, Eliza still sleeping peacefully in his arms. Wilhelmina turned to him, to the life they were building together, and smiled. "Yes," she said, I'm home. And as she stepped through the doorway into his embrace, she knew it was true. Her baby had been crying under the wagon. The cowboy had said they were both safe now, and against all odds he had been right. They were safe. They were loved. They were home.